Welcome back to part 2 of the Nursing Post podcast with Ashley and Rosa and our special guest today, Cherie Quinn. Hi, Cherie.
Hi.
So we kind of want to pick up where we left off. We talked about RaDonda and like the slew of red flags, but now we kind of want to talk about the backside of it. Like, how did she end up being criminally charged and found guilty of 2 crimes?
And not only that, how that she is the only person that is being penalized at all.
Great point. I'm going to start with the Tennessee Board of Nursing because they did investigate this and it came back as no findings. So there was never anything reportable on her nursing license because they couldn't find anything in the investigation which would indicate that she was at fault for her nursing license to be pulled.
Which blows my mind.
Yes, which leads us all down this rabbit hole as to how can she the first time be unfounded from the Tennessee Board of Nursing to the second time, not having a license. So I know, Ashley, you had mentioned kind of like the hospital covering up or misappropriating the situation.
Yes. So that was kind of one of my biggest issues with this whole case. Whether or not people think RaDonda was at fault, to me, I think that's kind of pretty cut and dry, considering, yes, she made a mistake. There's no doubt. She's already said she made a mistake. But beyond that, she was told things like not to document on it.
Well, at that time, they had just went to Epic. They had just started a new system for EMR.
That was in November, right?
Yes.
But in my eyes, I guess I'm just like, I don't care when you went to your new system. That doesn't impact what we should be doing as nurses to report and do the right thing on our end. Like, you figure it out. You get the Epic super user or whatever they call it for Epic in here to figure it out.
Also, what about their internal reporting system when they have a risk event or an adverse event?
So the reason that I read in the CMS report and in the investigation part was supposedly Epic is like real-time everything. So they figured that when she went into, the dispensing system, that it would date, time, and stamp the withdrawal of the medication and automatically attach that to the patient's EMR chart because Epic does that.
But they also assumed that she scanned the medicine in radiology department.
But there wasn't a scanner.
Right. Which, how long did they know there wasn't a scanner? That's curious.
Oh, I'm sure that's one of those things that, as a nurse and somebody we all deal with an EMR of some sort or have dealt with an EMR of some sort. There are constant complaints and criticisms that nurses have in general about these systems that are not right, that are not appropriate. And we're ultimately told, oh, there's nothing we can do about that. You got to find a workaround.
Yep.
Or I've reported it to IT. There, a ticket's already been submitted. How many times have we heard that?
Oh my God.
Like, oh, they're working on it.
But at what point, and maybe this is a question, like, at what point do we take it upon ourselves to go higher? Because I see issues like telling me, oh, that's just the way it is, or find a workaround. That's not never good enough for me. I'm not one of those people. I can't just say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. No, that's not just the way it is. That's not good patient care. Vanderbilt's a nonprofit hospital organization. Vanderbilt has a great name.
Well, they did.
I've had family members that went to Vanderbilt or friends to get health care. If it's happening there in this prestigious medical community, because this is not some community hospital in a town of 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. This is a huge medical organization, a huge medical center associated with a teaching university. So it's happening everywhere.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, or part of the biggest takeaway from this, is if all these little incidences can happen within a place like Vanderbilt, it is very naive of any nurse to think that this could not happen at their facility.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think we have to take into consideration at some point, you know, Vanderbilt settled a civil lawsuit with the family, with the Murphys, and they settled outside of court. They made sure not to go to court, and they settled an undisclosed amount to the Murphy family in 2018. Then it's just coincidental. I don't know. I really don't believe in coincidences, that this particular situation of RaDonda and Miss Murphy was reported to CMS. And for those of you who are not familiar with CMS, because you may not be a nurse or you work in a different aspect of healthcare and you're just not familiar with it, I equate CMS in the medical field to the IRS in the civilian field. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I equate that. Like, you don't want to mess with the IRS. For Pete's sakes, they'll take your drawers, your house, your car, and put you in the clinker. And that's kind of how I feel about CMS here. And it wasn't until it was anonymously reported to the state of Tennessee and to CMS that the paper trail, or lack thereof, kind of started to raise red flags.
I just think that there's more behind the scenes with this than anybody wants to really talk about, because when you get into any of these bigger corporations, and Vanderbilt just being one of them, any of these government agencies, whether they're private, nonprofit, any of these things, there's so much handshaking and deal making on the back end that it would appall most people to even think about, probably more so than even I recognize, that there has to be another underlying motive with this as to why they're going to randomly pick this one incident and throw this nurse under the bus. Because I can guarantee you, we know, like we had said previously, medication errors kill thousands of people in the United States alone every year. And some people have even said in many articles that it could be the third largest cause of death in the United States collectively, just medication errors in some way.
Well, I do have to applaud, even though she made a lot of mistakes, I do have to applaud her integrity of admitting and owning and being accountable for the mistake that she made. And I know when CMS investigated, they talked to her, they talked to nurse number 2, the radiology tech 1 and radiology tech 2. I mean, they talked to the director of the hospital, they talked to everybody. In the investigation, RaDonda was asked whether or not anybody else in the hospital was notified besides the physician and the nurse practitioner. And she said days after the event that she had some conversations with risk management.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, on the 3rd, she was terminated by her nurse manager.
Which I think is ultimately the right decision. However, what is not being, in my opinion, highlighted enough is Vanderbilt's responsibility.
Absolutely.
What role do they play in fostering an environment where it was known that these nurses were overriding medications on a daily or almost every time they had to give any medicine? What environment are they fostering when they're covering up and not giving, or maybe not covering up per se, or maybe not full disclosure?
Turning a blind eye, in my opinion.
Right.
They know there's something wrong, but if you just turn a blind eye.
Saving face.
Exactly. The other thing I read in the CMS was during the investigation was asking her, what was your job that day? And she told them that she was a help all nurse. And they were like, well, what is that job description? What does that entail? And she tells them there is no job description. She says that she does what she's told, and you just document what you do.
Mm-hmm. They likened it to a resource nurse, which resource nurse may mean different things for us than it does to Vanderbilt. But a resource nurse in our medical organization is someone who is familiar with the majority of floors.
Which she was not. She admitted that she was not. She had an orientee, which she admitted caused some of the distraction.
Right. But she agreed to the orientee.
Correct.
So, that there could be some cultural nursing issues there to discuss in another podcast, because that's a whole
because they
other
obviously
issue.
found her competent enough to train other employees, and we'll just leave it right there.
I don't think that competence is ever really a factor in training people.
Unfortunately, Ashley, I agree with you. But what about, and this is not just Vanderbilt, we're talking about every hospital organization. What kind of environment are we fostering if we constantly ignore warning signs and red flags?
Well, and not only that, what happens now? So she's been found guilty. What happens for nurses now reporting their errors? Some nurses are already not reporting their errors.
Absolutely.
So do you think this is going to foster a better?
Like you're saying, it's all hospital based, because even the hospital failed to report this death from this medical error to the state. They failed to report it, period.
Yep.
And so, like Ashley saying, RaDonda's not alone. The hospital should bear some type of responsibility in this, besides whatever they settled out of court. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that that's enough to excuse them for not doing their, part either. CMS would have never found out about this without an anonymous tip. Right. That says a lot all in of itself. The hospital didn't report it. The only reason it was reported was because somebody anonymously reported it after she was probably found, guilty, and the hospital settled in a civil situation.
Right.
That's how Tennessee got all of the evidence to go ahead and press charges against RaDonda, was from CMS investigation, the civil suit, and RaDonda herself. She admitted to it.
Yeah. So now what?
Ultimately, everybody's just going to wait to see what the sentencing looks like.
Well, she was ultimately convicted of 1 felony count, gross negligence of an impaired adult, which carries 1 to 2 years. Then she was found guilty of 1 felony negligent homicide, which is 3 to 6 years. She's looking at a bare minimum of 4, but maximum almost 10.
And that's just imprisonment we're talking about in a facility.
Imprisonment, yes.
And we're not talking about the lifetime regret that I'm sure she will live with. And hopefully one day, let's just hope that her intentions were never ill. They were never, the intent was never criminal. And therefore, there's got to be a huge burden of guilt felt by her, and the fact that she has to live with this for the rest of her life. Not to mention the family of the patient who has been drugged through this and reliving this nightmare over again because of this case.
Even though they didn't want it?
Yeah, they didn't want her to be federally prosecuted or charged, but the state of Tennessee, on their own accord, felt that they had enough evidence to charge her. So that
leads us to the political implications of this case for the local district attorney. And some papers are reporting that this was a political move
for her reelection. It takes a lot to surprise me anymore. It's so sad to say. So I am not surprised that somebody has used her and this case against the family's wishes for their own personal gain.
I will say that part of me really does feel that in the past couple of years in nursing altogether, nurses have become much more vocal about the unsafe staffing ratios, that not having adequate training, or being new orientees and they're supposed to get 6 months of training, but then they only end up with 2 or 3 months of training, and then they're given their own caseload. And there is this part of nursing that we're like, oh, it's great that we can go 12 hours without eating and only peeing once. Like that's not something to be proud about.
Well, it's almost as if you speak up and say that it's unsafe, you're looked at as less than of a nurse.
Yes.
Or you receive blowback from it and retaliated against, and you're terminated.
Right.
And I don't know if it's just this case that has exploded into the news to where now media outlets are now pulling all these other cases, and that's what's all of a sudden sparking word I'm seeing, article after article after article of these nurses that are now being indicted and being charged criminally for different things. And I'm like, it almost feels like open season on nurses, where it's, oh, you guys want to have an opinion, you don't want to do what you've been doing for the past 20 years and killing yourself and being happy about it. Okay. So now there's all these things that are coming to light. There are nurses out there who have intentionally killed people.
Yeah, we're not talking about those nurses.
That's completely different.
That's completely different
than nurses who make a mistake and that results in a death.
Whether and it is called the practice of medicine, by the way. I will always say that it is called the practice of medicine for a reason.
Exactly. And
sure, we've said that 1,000 times.
In order for someone to decide whether or not a nurse's actions were to the point where they need to lose their nursing license or there needs to be something done, in my opinion, that needs to come from the state board of nursing. Nobody understands nursing or what you have to do or how you have to manage or juggle or do any of these things unless you're in the nursing field or in healthcare and you understand that aspect of it. So somebody coming in with no medical background whatsoever does not understand things that nurses do.
The jury of her peers.
We're not just thinking about that. How many of them were medical professionals?
Actually, one was a nurse and one was a healthcare worker. They didn't identify what kind of healthcare worker, but one of them was a nurse. So I'm interested to know. I would love to, delve into their minds and be a fly on the wall. And that's less than 4-hour deliberation, by the way, less than 4 hours it took them to find her guilty on these charges. But what does that mean for you and me and our nurse friends, our colleagues across our organization? I think our organization CEO released a statement in reference to this, as many others I've read in the area the past few weeks, because it is a scary time. We're already short-staffed, not only in the outpatient setting, but most importantly in the inpatient setting, bedside, and that's coming off of this pandemic that highlighted all of these other issues that we're having. Because mind you, this happened all pre-COVID.
Yes.
And so what does this mean for nursing? What does this mean for healthcare? What does this mean for the future of our children's healthcare here in America?
Well, I can tell you that people who were willingly reporting their medical errors will probably think twice now.
Yeah.
3 times maybe.
Well, and it's just sad because those medical errors that were reported, the hospital systems are supposed to be banking on those to find errors before they become really bad.
That's what risk management is for. So the fact that she talked to risk management and nothing really ever changed after that is just a failure and a shortfall to the patient and to the nurses and
Absolutely.
future patients and future nurses that continue to work there. It's not, they found something that was wrong and they had no intentions of correcting it until this case. And if I'm not mistaken, I have seen an article within the last few weeks where they are currently being sued, the hospital.
And I wonder, just curious, if all of this was erased and we replaced RaDonda with Dr. Vaught instead of RN
Whether
behind her.
she would even be having, would we even be having this conversation?
Right.
Would we?
I don't know. I don't know if we would.
I think there's a high probability that we wouldn't.
I'm about 99.9% sure that we would not be having this conversation had it been a resident or a full-blown MD that had made this med
It's
error.
funny because I remember hearing somebody go, oh, well, you know, Michael Jackson's doctor was criminally prosecuted. And I'm like, that is not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that was
they're
Michael
not
Jackson.
Apples to,
Yeah,
not
that's
apples to
apples,
apples.
oranges.
Yeah. He was knowingly giving the medicine. He knew what he was giving, but he was giving it out of, you know, the normal prescribing.
Right.
Well, and it made such national headlines that there's no way that they could not try to make an example out of that physician. So it's apples to oranges, like you said. It's not comparing the same thing.
No, giving somebody a wrong medicine and giving somebody a medicine that you know what it is and you know what it can do is completely different.
I just hope nurses learn from this. I actually watched some of the RaDonda Vaught trial, and she did make a statement after her conviction in which she was not bitter or angry or upset. You know, she did express, you know, sympathy for the family, that is not, this verdict is not going to bring their family back. But she's hoping that this will be an educational moment for healthcare workers and hospitals everywhere to take note of, you know, systemic and personal failures. She realizes, you know, that there were mistakes that she made, but there were also mistakes that, you know, the hospital made as well. And I'm hoping that a lot of us reflect and take into consideration what this means for us. Like I said, I would never, ever, ever in my career take a verbal order 3 to 4 people down the line.
Right.
I would have never done that, even being a new nurse.
Yeah.
So I hope this makes people think about, you know, what it means to have a tangible order from the appropriate person.
Protect yourself, protect the
Exactly.
patient. CYA. I mean, we say
Those
it all the time.
5 rights of administration, make
There-
sure that you're like following that and adhering to that 1000%. And when in doubt, ask. Like,
Yes.
if I were her standing at that AccuDose, I would have been like, I cannot find this medication, so I'm going to go get another nurse to help me. There is nothing wrong with you saying you need help. And I hope people take that away from the situation as well.
Absolutely. I think we all have to be there. In nursing, there's been a culture for a long time of, I've been here longer, I know more, or my title has more letters than your title. And that's not what it's about. You know, nursing is, we're here, we're created. Let's talk about Florence Nightingale for a minute. The whole purpose of nursing is to help people. And yes, it's become task oriented and it's become overwhelming. And in order to get through it, we have to rely on each other, and you have to be willing to go to your coworker or, you know, a fellow colleague or a doctor for that matter. Don't ever be afraid to speak up for patient safety or for yourself, ever.
And I agree. So we want to thank Cherie for joining us on this episode of the Nursing Post podcast. Please visit our website for any references or merchandise. And as always, you can find us on your favorite platform. Thank you again for listening to the Nursing Post.